Who is your favorite Splatoon villain? Maybe it's Commander Tartar, the AI that gained sentience and became disgusted with the modern world, later planning on sanitizing every living creature that roamed the Earth. Maybe it's Ursine Anomaly number 3, better known as Mr. Grizz, who, after learning about the extinction of mammal kind, decided to try and restore balance to Earth's ecosystem by bringing back mammals. Or maybe it's DJ Octavio, the leader of the Octarians who, after the Great Turf War, was forced off the mainland along with the rest of his people. While angered by this, he tried on multiple occasions to overthrow the Inklings and take over the surface once again. Let's look at the conflicting morals of this rad DJ. So we all know that towards the end of Splatoon 3's main story, DJ Octavio teams up with the new Squidbeak Splatoon to save the day. This is the moment that he redeemed himself after all of his horrible, evil actions from the previous games, right? Wrong. I mean, of course he redeemed himself in this moment, but I don't believe he was ever a bad guy. Just always sort of misunderstood in his motives. I'm sure most of us know the story of the Great Turf War by now, but in case you don't, or just forgot, let me refresh your memory. Around 100 years before the story of Splatoon 1, the Inklings and the Octarians lived together on the surface peacefully. When they evolved from the squids and octopi we know today, they lost the ability to survive in water, so land was crucial to both. Sadly though, it had started to become scarce, and tensions between the two rose dramatically. Eventually, the two species were forced to fight over the remaining land, and while it seems like victory was in the hands of the Octarians due to their superior technology, and the fact that the Inklings wouldn't wake up early in the morning, the Inklings persevered and eventually won the war, and it was mainly due to luck on their part. The Octarians were forced into underground domes to survive, and it seemed like they were doing somewhat okay for a while until they eventually couldn't keep up with power demands, causing their leader, DJ Octavio, to steal the Inkling's source of power, the Zapfish. Now, while I don't condone it, they really didn't have many other options. It was either steal the power source of the people who actually live on land, or die. You're telling me you wouldn't take the first option? Before I continue on the retelling of everything Octavio has said, done, and ate, I want to talk about his people for a bit. As I said, the Octarians were forced underground by the Inklings after their defeat in the Great Turf War. We never personally see the conditions they have to live through during their time in the domes, but we do get bits and pieces of how life was there from Octo Expansion and Side Order. Most of these bits and pieces come from Marina and Agent 8, both of whom served time in the Octarian army before deserting and going to the surface. First, I'll go over Marina's thoughts on the army and Octavio himself. In Octo Expansion, there are these chat rooms where Pearl, Marina, and Cuttlefish talk about many things, including the Great Turf War and the Octarian army. The first time we hear Marina talk about her experience is after Captain Cuttlefish shows Pearl something from his top-secret Octarian dossier. Man, Craig's not messing around. Anyways, we get to see a file on Marina Ida, an Octoling combat engineer. From this, we learn that she was enrolled in an elementary training program at age 6. Okay. I know this 100% goes against what I'm saying in this video, and I don't exactly have a good excuse for it, but hear me out. Oh god, I'm gonna be pulling that card a few times. Imagine your entire species was close to extinction, right? Wouldn't you do whatever it takes to save it? Even if it required you to do really bad stuff like that? It's not necessarily a good choice, I'll admit, but still. I'll bring this back up in a bit, because this actually ties into another point I want to talk about later. Later, when she finds out that Craig and Pearl know that she's an Octoling, she has this to say. Actually, before I continue, I'm sure you know this already, but the Calamari Incantation is an extremely important song in the lore sung by the Squid Sisters, and has the power to open the eyes of Octolings, causing them to want to defect from the Octarian army. Anyways, as I was saying, Marina says, "Once our souls have been freed, there's no way we can continue to live under the oppression of Octarian society." Now, while this sounds like the Octarian society is oppressing its own people, I don't believe that's what she's referring to. I do believe Marina means that they are being oppressed, but more from their fate due to their losses in the Great Turf War, not from their own people, though that may also be the case. Now, onto 8's thoughts on their time in the Octarian army. Throughout Octo Expansion, we collect these little things called memcakes every level we beat. Memcakes contain the memories of Kamaboko's test subjects, and are given to them as they progress through each test. We can see 8's thoughts on each memcake, so I'll talk about some of the more prevalent ones to our discussion. On the Octarian memcake, 8 says, "The world I knew seems like a trap. I'm drawn now to the strange and new. Would my old friends think me a sap?" From this, we can tell that 8 feels like their old life was like a prison, like the old world he knew wasn't exactly necessary anymore. On the Marina memcake, 8 says, "They told me that you had gone to ground, and your rad groove was concrete proof that you had made it safe and sound. This one isn't as important, but from this we can tell that the other Octolings had some idea of Marina escaping to the surface. On the Cali memcake, 8 says, "Your song inspired a blush of love. It gave my heart a fresh new start. Now I ascend to shores above." This just confirms that the calamari incantation was the main reason 8 sought after the Promised Land. On the Zapfish memcake, 8 says, "Encased in sturdy sphere of glass, it breaks my heart to see you caught with whiskers trembling as I pass." From this, we can see that 8 feels regret for what the Octarians have done to the Zapfish. I will also go over this more in a bit. Lastly, and most importantly, this is what 8 has to say on the DJ Octavio memcake. "I leave without ceremony. Don't be too sore, I wanted more. My sincerest apology." This tells us a lot. Firstly, we know that 8 most likely snuck off from the Octarian society without really telling anyone. Probably because deserters were probably outcasted anyways. Either that or imprisoned. Or maybe even executed if we look at examples from the real world. I doubt that last part though, because there isn't really any evidence to support it, but we definitely do know that it was looked down upon to just leave Octarian society. We can also tell that 8 is somewhat sorrowful for having to leave. They don't wish for Octavio's downfall or anything like that. They really do just want to go to the surface to live a better life. If Octavio was a cruel and horrible leader, surely 8 would have something negative to say about him, you would think, but they don't. They even apologize to Octavio for abandoning him and his people. Obviously not in person, but still. Side order spoilers. From this point on, go to this number to avoid spoilers. In side order, we get more information on Octavio and the Octarian society. Most of the information we get is from Marina's dev diaries, which is from Marina's perspective after Splatoon 2's Final Fest. She talks about many things, like when she deserted from the Octarian army, or when she first heard the calamari incantation. In the third dev diary, she talks about how more Octolings are making it to the surface, and that there's real progress in the Octarian movement to make it to the surface, though she says that there are some Octolings still stuck underground. We also hear about these Octoling engineers that helped Marina work on the Memverse. The Memverse being a virtual world created by Marina to try and help the sanitized Octolings affected by Kamaboko. I won't go into too much detail on the Memverse. I'll save that for a future video if you guys want to see that. Anyways, these Octoling engineers will also be important later. One more thing I want to talk about in these dev diaries. Oct, who is another protagonist in Side Order, has a few diaries of their own that we can read. From them, we learned that Oct was sent to the instructor's office quite a lot, with them saying that they were told to be diligent and dedicated, like a true Octarian. This once again shows that Octoling society really is hardened at a young age, probably to train them to try and take control of the surface someday in the future. Oct also writes that Marina's desertion caused a lot of chaos in the Octarian society. Marina was a high-ranking member in the Octarian ranks, so it would make sense that her leaving would cause some chaos. But with what 8 said earlier about her, it seems that maybe her leaving got other Octolings talking more and more about the Promised Land. Just interesting to think about. Two more things I want to talk about with Side Order before we move on. I'm assuming we all know at least a little about how the pallets work. Basically, they're tied to their respective owners' souls, which you can see once you get them from the lockers. Every time you get a new pallet, Pearl and Marina talk about it a bit. Once you get Octavio's pallet, Pearl talks about putting his pallet to work as a sort of revenge for apparently running Marina ragged during her time in the military. Marina then comments that he didn't really work her that hard, so it seems even Marina doesn't blame Octavio too much for the things he did. Even the whole letting her, work at age 6 thing. Also, once you beat Side Order with a specific pallet, you can see what Smollusk, the used-to-be main villain, has to say about the person connected with it. For Octavio's pallet, Smollusk talks about how he seems to spend most of his time flying around in his giant mech instead of helping Octokind. Though, Smollusk isn't the most reliable source of information, it turns out, and it does seem pretty biased towards Order, so I wouldn't trust much that comes from it. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk about from these DLCs for now. From all that, we learned a lot, like how the awakened Octolings feel about Octavio and the Octarian society. Most of them seem to understand why Octavio did the things he did, and seem to still have some respect for him. But we still have more to go over. In Splatoon 1, 2, and 3, we can find Sunken Scrolls. Sunken Scrolls are lost pieces of history that can be found around Octo Valley, Octo Canyon, and Alterna. Each scroll gives us different pieces of lore about Splatoon's story. Many of them talk about the Octarian society, so those will be the ones I'll go over here. In Splatoon 1, Sunken Scroll number 2 tells us that the Octarians dwell in deep underground domes that are all connected via kettles. Sunken Scroll number 6 says that the Octarian Department of Energy says that they are running low on power, and that their domes are deteriorating very quickly. It seems if change doesn't come soon, then Octarian society may be doomed. Sunken Scroll number 16 just proves that the Inklings and Octarians once lived in peace, until rising sea levels forced them to battle over remaining territory. In Splatoon 2, Sunken Scroll number 2 shows us Octavio's and Agent 3's battle from Splatoon 1, and how anyone that saw that fight and heard the Calamari incantation had their lives changed that night. We can also see someone very familiar in the picture given with it. Sunken Scroll number 23 seems to be from Callie after she was brainwashed by Octavio. We'll get back to that as well. And it seems that she's pizzazzing things, that's so stupid, in the Octarian society. Sunken Scroll number 24 explains that sentient tentacles are implanted into different machines, including the Great Octo weapons. I can't decide if this is a bad thing morally or not, because it clearly says that the tentacles are sentient, so they seem to be experimenting with their own kind to make these strange tentacle things. But it never talks about forcing them to be in the machines. They also seem pretty compliant, and willing to control the Great Octo weapons, so I guess it's not a horrible thing to do. Surprisingly, in Splatoon 3, none of the Sunken Scrolls talk about Octoling society, so I will not be going over them. Now that we've gone over what the Octarian society was like, I want to talk about the main Octo himself, DJ Octavio. We've already gone over this once or twice, but I want to talk about it one last time. We know that DJ Octavio took part in the Great Turf War over 100 years ago. Due to the rising tides at the time, the Octarians and Inklings were forced to fight over the remaining land, and the Octarians lost, being forced to live inside of underground domes to survive. It seems that things were going fine at first for his people, but once he realized that they were going to run out of power eventually, he needed to do something. This eventually led to him stealing the Great Zapfish from Inkopolis Plaza. From what we can gather, either Octavio tried for over 100 years to help his people without stealing the Great Zapfish, or that's how long it took until they were able to do so. Maybe even both. Inevitably, stealing the Great Zapfish would catch the attention of an old friend of Octavio's, Captain Cuttlefish, who would then go and recruit Agent 3 of the new Squidbeak Splatoon. Agent 3 would proceed to absolutely plow through the entire Octarian army, and eventually recover the Great Zapfish. We know that Octavio stole the Great Zapfish when faced with an impossible decision. Either steal it from the Inklings, who not only live on the surface, but also have other means of generating power sufficiently, or let his entire species slowly and painfully die out. At this point, reintegrating Octarians into Inkling society wasn't exactly a choice, because it seems the Inklings still didn't have great views on the Octarians, so stealing the Great Zapfish was really his only logical choice. Sure, maybe it wasn't the nicest thing to do exactly, but he didn't really have any other option. His people didn't live on the surface, and didn't have many ways of generating power besides it. Years after Splatoon 1's story mode, Octavio once again steals the Great Zapfish, but he doesn't just take that, he also kidnaps previous pop star Callie from the Squid Sisters. Captain Cuttlefish and Agent 3 were busy with a separate mission at the time, so Marie, wanting both the Zapfish and Callie back, is forced to recruit a new Inkling into the new Squidbeak Splatoon. This Inkling, known as Agent 4, continues to decimate through the entire Octarian military, just like how Agent 3 did years prior. Eventually, Agent 4 reaches Octavio, who, with the help of a brainwashed Callie, starts fighting Agent 4. Eventually, with the help of Marie and Sheldon, 4 beats Octavio and saves Callie, leaving the Octarians without a power source once again. I want to talk about the whole Octavio brainwashing Callie thing. You may think this would be a reason why Octavio is morally bad, but I think it actually shows some of his positive morals. When we finally find Callie, she's not being held in a cage, she doesn't seem injured, she doesn't seem to be in any danger at all. She's just brainwashed. During 4's fight with Octavio, Callie is there, sure, but she doesn't really do much besides be a sort of hype man to Octavio. You'd think if Octavio went through all the trouble of kidnapping and brainwashing Callie, he'd use her to fight the rest of the Squidbeak Splatoon when they eventually came for the Zapfish. But he doesn't. He doesn't force her to fight. She's not being held prisoner, physically. She's not being forced to do work, nothing like that. So, why exactly did Octavio kidnap Callie? Well, I think the reason is pretty obvious. He kidnapped her to raise the morale of the Octarian society. Not only had the Octarians been suffering for over 100 years, but once they finally get a glimmer of hope after stealing the Zapfish, Agent 3 comes along and absolutely decimates a decent portion of the Octarians' military. Morale would definitely be at an all-time low at this point. So what would Octavio do? Obviously he would try to steal the Zapfish again, but would that be enough? Maybe Octavio saw how popular the Squid Sisters were, how happy they made the Inklings in Inkopolis, and decided to kidnap Callie to bring joy to the Octarians. Not only would kidnapping a member of the Squidbeak Splatoon raise morale, But kidnapping a member of the Squidbeak Splatoon that was also a pop star could really, figuratively, brighten things up in the domes. Sure, it also may not have been the greatest thing to do, kidnapping Callie, but it could definitely help the Octarians, and Octavio most likely knew this. I will say, Octavio could have probably just asked the new Squidbeak Splatoon for help, and they may have just done so. But for all Octavio knows, the Inklings would have destroyed every Octarian if given the chance. So was it really a risk worth taking? Anyways, now that I've talked about many of the better things Octavio has done for his people, I guess it's time to address some of the elephants in the room. First off, let's begin with the allowing of children to work in the military. When Marina Ida was only 6 years old, she was enrolled in an elementary training program, and at age 10 started designing weapons of war. At age 16, she was assigned to DJ Octavio's Wasabi supply unit, so he 100% knew that Marina was young when she started working, but did nothing about it. I know that times were hard for the Octarians, but eventually, some points were crossed. You would think that they would try and do whatever they could to help their children live a better life in the future, but instead, they seem to work. I'm not sure if they're forced to work, but they would probably at least be looked down upon if they didn't. It would be at least a little more understandable in their later teen years, but I don't really have an explanation for being enrolled in a training program at age 6. Another point I want to bring up is about the captured Zapfish. When looking at Agent 8's memcake of the Zapfish, we are told that they are encased in spheres of glass, which we already knew, but we were also told that they seemed scared as they were trapped. When the Inklings have the Zapfish, mainly the Great Zapfish, we can see that it is allowed to roam freely above Inkopolis, and it even sometimes can be seen swimming around Piranha Pit, unless this is a different one, which it could be, but still. When the Octarians have the Zapfish, they are forced into small little glass cages, and the Great Zapfish is forced into the Octobot King by DJ Octavio, so Octavio is at the very least partaking in some animal abuse, which, you know, isn't a very, good thing. And finally, in side order, we are told about these Octoling engineers that Marina hired to help with the members. Correct me if I'm wrong with any of the information in this part. I wasn't too sure on this part of the story, and can't find much about it. I believe these Octoling engineers were working on the members, and all shared a common philosophy deep down inside of them. They all wanted a world that would never change. Those desires would mix with the members and help create order, the main villain of the game. But I'll go over that in a different video. Order, or, well, Smallest now, tells us that the Octoling world used to be a peaceful and stable place, but was ruined after some Octolings wanted to reach the surface. I will once again say that we should take everything Smallest says with a grain of salt, because it isn't the most reliable source in the world. Oct does support what Smallest says here, though. This all shows us that even after everything, many Octolings still supported Octavio and what the Octarians were doing, and didn't want that to change. Though the Octoling world had been going through many changes very quickly, so many may have felt lost or confused once their lives started changing. Octavio has been an important part of every Splatoon game to date, which makes sense considering he is the leader of the Octarians. He has done many things to try and help his people throughout this entire time. He fought the Inklings to try and gain control of the surface world during the Great Turf War. He's stolen the Great Zapfish for power twice. He's kidnapped Callie to try and boost the morale of his people, and I'm sure he's done many other things for the Octarian people. Of course, none of these things he's done were great options, but he was never given right choices. It was always either stealing from the Inklings, or the death of his people. Of course, on a few occasions he's done some morally bad things, but it's always been to try and help his people. You could very well say that the Inklings, mainly the new Squidbeak Splatoon, has done some morally questionable things as well, like splatting hundreds of Octarians and leaving them with no power support for their civilization. But you could also chalk that up to the fact that the Octarians had robbed them of an important component of their civilization, that being the Zapfish, and things would have been really hard without it, even if they did have other power sources. In this story of Inklings versus Octarians, there are no good guys, no bad guys. It's a tragic story of survival in harsh conditions, and misunderstandings on both sides. There's an easy answer that could fix both of their problems, but neither side does anything to try and get that answer. With leaders still somewhat stuck in their old ways, you have an idea of why nothing has changed in the past century. Luckily for everyone involved, the story does have a happy ending. After Callie was saved, and the Great Zapfish was saved for a second time, and a whole load of their forces were splatted once again, the Octarians, mainly the Octolings, decided that they had had enough, and with a second round of hearing the Calamari incantation, many started to desert the Octarian military. Some made it to the Promised Land, but thousands didn't. A completely new threat to not only Octolings, but every surface dweller on the planet was starting to emerge. Luckily, Due to a small group of individuals, the two species were able to finally put aside their differences in the face of a greater danger. Once their fight was over, many stray Octolings like Agent 8 were able to leave the underground dome safely, and were able to start incorporating themselves into Inkling society without many issues. This didn't put Octavio out of a job though. As of Splatoon 3, he was still trying to help his people. At least whatever was left of his troops. It seems even more have gone missing, and it is once again up to the new Squidbeak Splatoon, the new Squidbeak Splatoon, to figure out why, and team up with Octavio once again to save the world, finally putting their tensions of the past to rest.